Canine foster parents. Welcome to Module 1 of the MSPCA's Canine Foster Care Program training. In this training, we're going to be discussing the goals of the foster care program, setting the standards of care and establishing your limits when fostering, discussing observational skills for reading body language in your foster dog, and discussing how that is a constant dialogue between you and the dog you are fostering, and learning how to listen and respond to them appropriately. Discussing decompression of your foster dog in the home, as well as giving them choices while you have them in foster care. The goals of the foster care program training are to allow you to continue to learn about each dog that is placed into foster with you. And this includes learning their behaviors in the homes and collecting information about positive behaviors they have, as well as challenges that are identified and how to communicate those to your foster care team, as well as teaching you how we can help our dogs learn to appropriately communicate with people. We are also going to be discussing meeting these dogs where they are in terms of considering the number of stressful events they have experienced prior to being placed into your foster home and not setting any expectations when they're coming into your home. We're also going to be discussing decompression and management and making it easy for them to make right decisions, and also making their transition into adoptive homes a little bit easier. Throughout this module, as well as module 2 and 3, we are going to be having some rules as well as recommendations. So we wanted to make sure we differentiated what those are and to make it easier for you when you're taking a foster animal home. So any rule is going to be highlighted in blue throughout all of these trainings. These guidelines are in place for every single animal that we are placing into foster care to increase the chances of success while they are in a foster home. Where our recommendations are not going to be identified by any certain color in the text, but these are going to be a standard set of recommendations that should be followed unless you were instructed to otherwise. These recommendations may be tailored for your foster animal to increase their chances of success in a foster home, and those will be communicated to you during the beginning of your fostering experience when you were taking that animal home. Setting the standards of care. We thought it was really important for our foster caregivers to understand how our foster dogs are identified. So these dogs are identified by a group of teams and departments at each shelter location of the MSPCA who work in collaboration to identify an animal that has medical or behavioral or both needs that would be best suited to be met in a foster home. This group includes medical, behavior, foster, and management teams, but can also include our animal welfare staff as well as adoption teams. Our first option is to always put them into adoptive homes, so get them available for adoption. But depending on the circumstance, that might not always be an option for that animal, or it might be used in conjunction with placing them into foster care. Every animal that we're placing into foster is considered an individual. You're going to be hearing this phrase a lot through our canine trainings, and I'm sure have already heard it a lot in our orientation as well. And that is because every animal is its own individual. No two dogs are the same, which means that no two fostering experience will be the same. And it's really important that our fosters go into each fostering experience keeping that in mind and having no set personal agenda for what they expect the dog to know prior to taking them into their home. For example, one big thing that we're always asked is this dog housebroken? And the answer is most likely no. Or sometimes we don't know. Or it can depend because things change depending on the environment. So it's always important to kind of enter that experience, expecting the dog to know nothing and potentially being pleasantly surprised. It's important that you understand where our dogs are coming from as well. So we discussed this a bit in our orientation, but to give you a little bit of a refresher, these dogs are coming from owner surrenders or some of our Southern Rescue Transport groups, or even from law enforcement cases are some of the big reasons why they're coming into us. And it's really, really important to understand that regardless of where these animals are coming from, they have been through a lot of stress and transitions to get to your home. And that can certainly affect an animal. So keeping in mind that we want to make things as smooth as possible, so following our instructions that are within this module as well as our others is really important to making sure that you have a successful fostering experience. And it's always okay to be overwhelmed. We're here to help. Being overwhelmed when taking a new dog into your home is something that we deal with a lot. It's kind of like when taking a puppy home after having a senior dog who is already housebroken and not really mouthy or not having any additional challenges. You can get overwhelmed. It's hard to kind of meet that dog where they are, which is another phrase you're going to be hearing us talk about a lot in this training. So it's really important that we're going into this fostering experience, making sure that we don't have any expectations for what they know, but also establishing what your limits are. At what point can you say, this is too much for me to manage in my household at this point in time? Is really important to be able to ask yourself that question and continue to evaluate your ability to care for that dog in your home. And always remember that having returned a foster dog is not a failure by any means. If you're not able to meet with that dog's needs or it's too much for you to manage, things certainly change. We are more than happy to take that dog back, and sometimes it's better off. Establishing what your limits are. It's really, really important as a foster caregiver that you're asking yourself these questions prior to committing to a fostering experience. And this is going to help make sure that your foster animal, as well as you, have a successful experience fostering. So one of the big things and most important things is making sure you're asking yourself how much time you can commit to this animal on a daily basis. Are you able to meet all of its needs? And the amount of time that you're going to have to commit is certainly going to change. And it's going to vary from fostering experience to fostering experience. A puppy who is not housebroken and might like to rip up his area might need a little bit of extra time to clean up and set up that space again each day. Or a dog that maybe has more challenges and needs extra medication or more time working one-on-one with. Are you going to be able to commit to that additional time? Also thinking of if something comes up and you do have to start introducing adding more care into that dog schedule, are you going to be able to commit to that as well? Some of our dogs might go into a home and a challenge might be identified that needs a little bit of extra time and one-on-one time with you to train, or they might need more enrichment or management in the home. Are you going to be able to keep this pet's world small initially? So do you have a really busy household? Do you have people coming over to visit you frequently? Or do you have a party planned for the weekend after you're taking a dog home? Or maybe you're planning on going on vacation sometime in that expected foster window. These are things that we like to see not happen as they're settling into the home, and sometimes for the entire time that they're with you. So definitely discussing with your foster caregiver or foster coordinator if that is a challenge that you might have when taking this dog home. And then, do you have space to manage this dog in your home? Thinking of both indoors and outdoors. So some of our Boston Fosters, your space might be a little bit tighter than somebody who has a little bit more breathing room. Do you have the space to set up that animal in your home where you can keep that animal safe as well as keep some of your belongings safe? As well as thinking of the outside. Do you have space to walk that dog without having to come into access with other people or other animals? Or, do you have a dead-end street that you really run into people? Thinking of those things is very, very important prior to taking an animal home.
On this slide, we will discuss our philosophy for supporting the dogs in our care. It's very important that we arrange their environment in a way that will make it most likely for them to succeed. What we mean by that is managing the world around them to ensure that the dog that is in our care is as likely to be successful as is possible. Examples of that might look like if we bring a dog into our home who's very likely to jump up on the counter or go through the trash can, we would arrange the space that they're in to avoid giving them access to countertops and trash cans. When we arrange their environment for them to be successful, it's then very important that we take every opportunity to tell them that they've gotten it right when they offer us the behavior that we're looking for. We can also use the information in situations where the dog has practiced a behavior that we were hoping that they wouldn't, to rearrange their environment and prevent them from making that wrong choice again. We know that those mistakes are going to happen, and when they do, it's really an important aspect of interacting with our foster dogs that we neutrally and calmly ignore that less than ideal behavior or undesirable behavior and end the interaction as quickly and succinctly, but neutrally and calmly as is possible. The thing that we want to take note of in those situations is that we're trying not to communicate to the dog in that moment that the thing that they've done is exciting or something worth trying again. So by essentially kind of ignoring what they're interested in and ignoring the less than ideal or undesirable behavior that they're attempting to practice, we're not giving them information that they maybe that's quite exciting and that their foster parent gets really animated or vocal or comes over and touches them a lot and gives them a lot of attention, but rather that the fun thing just ceases to exist. They're no longer given access to it in that space. And then we take all that information and we change the environment and or our behavior for the next time. While we have dogs in our foster system, it's really important that our foster caregivers are doing a lot of observation. And the way that we will get information in these observations is by knowing and understanding dog body language. Dogs really only have this one way to communicate with us, and that is through the use of body language. It's our job to become very fluent in reading dog body language, and also to become an expert in that individual dog's body language. This ability to read body language and then kind of adjust our response and our how we use our body, whether we're giving them distance and moving away from them, or whether we're inviting them in to come closer to us and receive pets and attention, how we adjust our body language as a result of things that they're communicating is really how we start to improve understanding and communication. It's a conversation, just as if both parties were speaking English, but we know dogs can't speak English, so we, as their caregiver, take it on as our responsibility to learn their language. When we're considering dogs' body language, we really want to be as objective as we possibly can. So as you're observing this information and recording it or relaying it back to your foster coordinator, the goal of that is for us to use that information to be able to help you support the dog in your care, as well as to help us to support them in their pathway forward towards adoption. And a big part of that is being able to communicate with adopters about how this specific dog might communicate and what those communications mean. So it's really imperative that we talk about dog body language and write up whatever we might be recording about their body language in a way that is really objective. So we're really looking at kind of 5 key points. We're looking at their head, and when we look at their head, we're looking at their ears, their eyes, and their mouth. We're looking at their tail, and then we're looking at their overall posture, and then we're considering all 5 of those areas in the context in which it exists. So we might have a dog who is standing in front of the handler or their caregiver, and they're making direct, prolonged eye contact. Their mouth is closed, their eyes might be wide open, their ears might be perked forward, and their tail might be out level behind them with their weight kind of evenly distributed as their overall posture. And in that context, the handler that they're looking at, if we're using this dog as an example, might be holding a toy. So looking at this dog's body language doesn't tell us what's not definitely going on around them, but if we know that the person that they're looking at is holding a toy, we might be able to ascertain that in this scenario, this dog is anticipating something exciting and good. But in a different context, maybe that same dog is standing, very confidently with their tail out straight, no motion in their body, very still, with their mouth closed and their eyes hard and forward with their ears perked forward, but they're staring at a dog on the other side of a fence. And in that very different context, we might expect that dog's next move might be different than to excitedly and with a release of tension, go chase a toy that their handler threw. So we want to be aware of all of those parts of the dog's body. And then we also want to take note of the context in which that body language exists to inform how we might interpret the body language that we're looking at. On this slide, we will discuss how our body language can affect the response that we see from our foster dog or whatever dog is in our care. In the top 3 images here, you can see 3 different handlers interacting with dogs in a way that is clearly causing those dogs to exhibit body language that expresses that they're uncomfortable. We'll talk through each one of these images, and then we'll talk about the 2 images below that show people exhibiting more appropriate body language and eliciting body language from their dogs that are much more relaxed. So in the top left image, we have a handler who is facing the dog in front of her pretty head on. So her shoulders and her head are directly facing the dog. She is leaning towards the dog and reaching towards the dog, encroaching in his space. She's touching him. And when we look at the dog, he has his body kind of faced away from her. So we can guess that when this interaction started, he didn't solicit it. He was laying with his body facing in the opposite direction, which you can tell by the way that he has his hips angled and has his weight leaning on his left shoulder away from her. He also has his head looking back at her, but he isn't turning his head all the way to look at her. He's using his eyes to kind of finish the look, and you can see the sclera, the little whites of his eyes. That's called a whale eye. And he is also furrowing his brow over his eyes in a way that, in the context in which this body language exists, can show us that that dog is pretty worried. In the second image, the middle image on the top row, we have a person who is looming over the dog. So that person is bent at the hip, leaning over the dog, reaching towards the dog and touching the dog. Also is using leash pressure to adjust where the dog is able to access, so the dog's not able to escape or move away. And in that image, you can see that that dog is exhibiting a lot of body language that alludes to him being pretty uncomfortable. So he has his weight low. He's not carrying his weight naturally on all 4 limbs evenly. He is holding himself close to the ground. He has his tail tucked up underneath of him. He is lipping his lip, which you can kind of see there. And a lip lick is kind of similar to a dog who is showing us a whale eye. That's kind of a obvious sign of discomfort. This dog is also whale eyeing at that handler. You can see that the whites of his eyes are showing. He also has his ears pinned back, and he is leaning his weight as much into that leash to get as much distance as he can with the limited access to distance that he has. So everything that dog is saying in the context in which he's in shows us that dog's really uncomfortable. In the last image on the top row, the furthest to the right, we have another person who is looming over. You can tell just where their toes and then their arm are hanging into the frame, that person's bent at the waist. So they are leaning over the dog and reaching their hand into the dog's space. And as a result, this dog is crouching. He's leaning away. He's shifting his weight off of the limbs that are closest to that person. His tail is tucked up underneath of him. His head is lowered, and he's looking up to that handler with his head lower than his shoulders. His ears are pinned. His back is arched. All of this tells us that this dog is really uncomfortable in this moment. One thing I'll add to that too is that, often we are told or given the advice to let a dog sniff you. And in order to do that, we're offering our hand into their personal space to invite them to sniff us. As we also know, there are dogs out there working jobs every day who are responsible for sniffing out all sorts of things from great distances or smells that were in an area months, even years ago. So their nose is their greatest superpower. They certainly don't need us to put our hands any closer to them for them to be able to get our scent. So if we are using our hands to invite a dog into our space, there are different ways to do that rather than to encroach on theirs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. On the two bottom images, we'll talk through what these two handlers are doing that's really, really great to set the dogs at ease, and they're using their body language in a very intentional way to have these dogs exhibit more comfortable body language. So in this bottom left image, the woman is crouched at the knee instead of looming over from the hip. So she's on the dog's level. She also is facing the same direction as the dog rather than facing the dog head on. She has her shoulders oriented in the same direction that the dog is facing, which is a really polite and inviting way to interact with the dog. She's also, as you can see, not reaching into the dog's space or encroaching into the dog's space in any way. And that dog has free access to move away if he wanted to, and he's clearly choosing proximity. He has his weight evenly distributed on all four paws. You can see he has what we would refer to as an almond eye. So his eyes are nice and soft and relaxed. There's no whites of his eyes showing. Of course, we have to take into consideration how a dog's body is naturally carried. So with Arctic breeds like the Shiba Inu, his tail is up and over his back, but it is at a natural carriage. It's just kind of flopped there softly versus pulled very high or held in a way where there's clear tension. And then we also see, his face appears relaxed. There's no tension in any of the muscles around his face. His ears are at their natural carriage. Just kind of perked forward without any tension. In the last image here, the bottom right, you see this handler is doing very similar things to the first handler. So crouched at the knee, not leaning over the dog, not encroaching on the dog's space, and using his shoulders to face the same direction as the dog. This dog does appear to be maybe a little bit more worried than that first one in that he's hanging back a little bit. He's not right up next to the handler. And you can see on his front left leg, he is kind of lifting that up a little bit. It's hard to tell in a stop, in an image that's not a video, if he's just shifting his weight to move forward or if he's purposely holding his weight off of that paw as like a slight paw lift, which can be indicative of a dog who is a little bit uncomfortable. But in every other way, this dog looks pretty relaxed. His ears are soft and to the side. His eyes look soft. His mouth is relaxed. He's not holding it like tightly shut. He's not panting heavily. Just seems as though he's carrying his mouth in a pretty normal and natural way. Next, we're going to talk about decompression. What we mean by decompression is giving the dog that we are taking into foster care the time, the space, not just the physical space, but the space from the people within the home and certainly other animals within the home to help them kind of regain an equilibrium. So get back to who they are, where they're comfortable, and out of that space of being very stressed after maybe being transported or maybe moving out of a familiar home into a shelter setting, having a shelter stay, and now transitioning out of that shelter stay into another home. All of that can be pretty stressful for dogs. And so on this slide, we're going to talk about the time and space that we're going to afford them to decompress from that stress. So the first thing that we want to do is to keep their world really small and really predictable. A small world is going to be a different definition for every dog. There are certainly dogs where they have, high need for exercise outlets. And so we might be expanding their world a little bit to give them access to their basic needs. That might be more involved than another dog who might be more of a couch potato. But ultimately, we want to prevent them from having to meet anybody outside of their immediate caregivers, explore any home spaces or indoor spaces like pet stores or things like that, Home Depots, etc., that are outside of the indoor spaces where they need to be in order to receive basic care and have their needs met. And we want to keep that world very predictable. So to the best of our ability, having a really well thought out routine that is in place before that dog comes into our home so that each day starts to look just like the one before it. And having that sense of predictability brings a lot of comfort to the dogs that are in our care. So like I said, we're avoiding asking them to meet new people or dogs outside of our household. And this should last for minimally the first 2 weeks. Even if you bring a foster dog home and the first night is maybe a little bit rocky, and by day 2, they wake up and seem like totally normal, well-adjusted dogs with no concerns, and we feel as though looking at the dog in front of us, they should be able to kind of go anywhere and do anything, we're still going to keep that built in 2 weeks of a small, predictable world. Hopefully, we find that these dogs are moving into adoptive homes before the 2 weeks is up, but in that window of time, we're really going to keep their world really small and really predictable. That's not a formula. That might need to be longer for some dogs, but we certainly don't want to make it shorter. When we say we want to avoid going out on the town or to any new environments, we want to make sure that before we consider taking this dog anywhere outside of the spaces where they need to be for us to meet their basic needs, that we have a really firm foundation for communication, understanding their body language, their unique habits and preferences before we start introducing other people or dogs or places into the equation. The reason for that is if we don't have a baseline for how that dog prefers to be interacted with or how that dog communicates, we won't have that information to inform other people how to interact or to inform our decision making about how they might or might not interact with other animals. It's also important that you consider any upcoming trips or visitors to your home that you know about and can predict, and discuss those situations with your foster coordinator so that there's a plan in place before that dog would be going into those situations without having a safety net. During the time of decompression, like I said, we really want to focus on observing their body language, observing their behavior, and we want to take that time to get to know who they are. We're trying to identify their likes and their dislikes. While they're in the shelter, we are able to evaluate them to some degree, and we will absolutely pass that information along to anyone who's participating in giving care to any of the dogs that are a part of our program. But there's always a lot more to learn once they get out of the shelter setting and into a home. So this is a time where we are looking for kind of trends in their behavior, like the things that we might see in their body language that are happening with a degree of frequency. We want to make note of that so that we can kind of build up our understanding of who this dog is, what they like and what they need. In the time where they're decompressing in that, minimum of 2 weeks, we want to give them every opportunity to sniff around. So we're not looking to get them out for, a marathon and cover a bunch of distance. What we really want to do is give them a chance to relax, settle in, and get to know the environment that they're in. So focusing on letting them explore that new environment, giving them lots of opportunities to sniff, and really reinforcing them when they do. We also want to take some time to consider how any other existing animals in our home might impact our foster dog's decompression period. The foster team and behavior team will help to advise fosters that are going home into a multi-pet household as to how to set that up, how to arrange the environment, things to look out for. But it is something that we should consider when we're sending a dog into a foster situation. There's certainly no formula on how long a foster dog will take to transition into your home. Some might adjust really quickly, others might need more time and support, and it's almost impossible to predict based on their behavior in a shelter how that might look when they go into a home. So as you are building this library of information about how your foster dog communicates their likes, dislikes, and preferences, all of that information can be used to help inform how we might be able to support them going forward. The next thing we're going to talk about is giving our dogs choice. So one way that we can really give our dogs a sense of agency and control over what happens to them, and therefore help them to decompress more readily and hopefully feel more comfortable, is to give them choice in the interactions that they have. Like we've already discussed in depth, that starts by becoming an expert in reading that dog's body language. The next step is to become really diligent in practicing petting consent tests. A petting consent test is very similar to what it sounds like. It is a test in which when a dog approaches us and they choose to be close to us, before we just go right in for the pet, we offer them our hands close to our bodies, not encroaching on their space. And if they very obviously request that we touch them by either leaning into us or shoving their head into our hands or resting their head closer to us and wagging their tail, any number of things that for that dog are clear signs of consent, then we can offer them that pet. And we can give them a couple of scritches or pets. And then the petting consent test itself is where we then remove our hands from petting them for just a moment. And then we re-offer our hands. And this is a way to ask the dog, do you want me to continue petting you? We have a full video that will be in the foster library that goes through in a lot more depth what petting consent tests are. But this is a great way to start to build a communication with the dogs that are in your care, whether it's your foster dog or your own dogs. And this is something that we would like for our foster caregivers to encourage other people who might be interacting with their foster dog in the future to do the same. This is an example, an illustration of how the process of a petting consent test might work. So the step one might be, you can see that this handler is crouching at the knee, not leaning over at the waist, and offering their hands close to their body, patting their leg to invite the dog over. You can see this could go one of two ways. So the no thanks way, this dog turns his head away and might scratch himself, kind of sniff around in a different direction. They don't come closer. So they're not choosing proximity. And that is by design. If a dog does not choose to be near you, it's because they don't want to be near you. If they choose proximity and they approach you, that's the first cue or clue to us that that dog is opting into this interaction. They want to come closer. The next step then is to offer them petting. So once they've come close to you, you can pet them gently in a really like non-threatening area. So we're not going to like reach over their head or thump them on the butt or give them, belly rubs. We're just a really non-threatening scritch on the chest or the, side of the neck, maybe a gentle ear rub. And then we're going to ask for consent. So step 3 is pausing. After we've told them you came over here, I offered you pets. So that's what you get when you come over here. Step 3 is us kind of saying, do you want that? Did you mean to ask for that by coming over here? And it gives the dog the option to say, absolutely, that's exactly why I came over here. So in the first option there where it says more, please, you can see that the dog is stretching forward and he's leaning in and he might paw you. And that dog is asking for the pets to keep coming. The second one, that dog might have realized, oh yeah, I just came over here to be close to you. I'm not actually looking for you to touch me. That's okay too. But you see that he doesn't opt in. This little cartoon dog turns his head away and isn't requesting more pets. So in that situation, we wouldn't solicit him back. We wouldn't try again. We would just accept that that is that dog's choice. We're providing him that agency to make that decision. And if he opts out of the interaction but wants to stay close to us, great. No petting needs to happen there.